My memory is correct. Did we cover this slide already? No? Okay. Yeah, don't worry. Don't write that down. Nobody cares about that. Okay, we're talking about control and performance. You can write down, we're still talking about control and performance, I think. There's two methods of scan. This is the one that we're going to use, control and performance. And of course, there's two control instruments, the attitude indicator and the RPM gauge. If you were flying a turbine, it might be the torque meter, or it might be the engine pressure ratio gauge. And you're going to look at that to decide what to do with the throttle lever, the elevators, the ailerons, and the rudder. You're going to use your flight controls and your power lever, your throttle, to make the RPM gauge say what you want and to make the attitude indicator say what you want. Then you're going to look at your performance instruments, which is everything else, the other 5 remaining out of the 6-pack. So it's the other 5 remaining out of the 6-pack. You're going to look at all of them and say, did things happen the way I planned? I got the attitude, I got the pitch I wanted, I got the bank I wanted, I got the power setting I wanted. Is the airplane performing the way I want it to? So you're going to look at all those to see. And then you're going to go back and you're going to fix any pitch, roll, or power you need in order to get the performance gauges to say what you want. So in theory, you've been practicing this for 8 or 9 simulator lessons. Oh, wait, I just said that part. So this control and performance technique is where you estimate the power and attitude you need. You set the attitude and power you want, you think is going to need, and then you look at the performance instruments. And then you say, okay, do I have to change my pitch, my roll, or my power because my performance isn't what I want, or it is what I want, and I'm going to keep it. Yeah, I could have done better on these last 2 slides. They were kind of redundant. Is anybody planning on flying piston-powered airplanes the rest of their career? I'm the only one? Okay. See what happens? Most crop dusters are going to turbines. You're going to be a crop duster? No. What kind of piston engine airplane might you fly for a living? Tomahawk. In my entire life, I've had 2 people tell me, I plan on becoming a career flight instructor. Oh, that's my retirement. Oh, it's flight C5. Okay. There you go. You're going to fly piston-powered airplanes for a long time. You should talk to Mr. Gallagher. He owned a big Piper dealership in L.A. in the 70s and into the 80s. It's fun running a flight school, he said sarcastically. Somebody's always flying your airplane and breaking it. He was telling me the story about somebody stole their Seneca. They were going to do a local flight, and they flew it back east. They ended up finding it in Mexico. They found an airplane in Mexico. And it took them 3 trips. And this was in the late 70s, early 80s, I think. It took 2 trips and a $6,000 bribe and a $5,000 bribe to get the airplane out of Mexico, which now is more like, instead of $11,000, it's more like $20,000 or $30,000. All right, partial panel. Woo-hoo-hoo! Yay, partial panel. Nobody loves partial panel. What's that saying? Everybody likes Sara Lee. Does anybody know what they make pies? Nobody doesn't like Sara Lee. You don't remember advertisements from the 80s. Okay. So partial panel, it's whenever one or more of your instruments fail. And of course, what are you going to do? You're going to maintain positive aircraft control by looking at the other gauges. Why, yes, that's what I do. You have to lower the tone of your voice 1 octave and have a little chuckle at the end. That makes you sound cooler. It's like wearing big sunglasses. So any instrument that breaks, that could, or that does rather, that does impact your IFR flight, you need to report it to air traffic control. Oh, yeah. I'm telling you, they're going to be nice to you. If you tell them that your attitude indicator fails, they're going to be nice. They're going to say, hey, Charlie, come over here. This plane's going to crash. I'm just kidding. They're going to treat you like you're a student pilot. They're going to talk slow and give you little turns and little descents, and they're going to say, are you doing all right? And this is well, I guess I can't say, maybe it's the most important thing on the slide. If you're VMC or VFR, if you're VFR and you can stay VFR, stay VFR. Land at a nearby airport that's VFR. How about today? We were shooting a VOR approach. How much fun would that be without your attitude indicator? Not much fun. What if you could land in Bakersfield because it was VMC in Bakersfield? You're going like, no way in hell am I going to land and stay all night in Bakersfield. You can rent a car and drive back up here so you don't have to stay all night in Bakersfield. So if you have an instrument failure that makes it difficult, or some other kind of failure for that matter, you know, the VOR breaks, the GPS dies, the comm radio goes out, you can't talk to air traffic control or you can't hear them, this is a really good answer in your hip pocket is, oh, if something happens and I'm in VFR, or in 10 minutes from now I end up in VFR, I'm going to stay VFR if I can and land. That's one good reason back in the old days before ForeFlight, IFR pilots carried sectionals and WAC charts, is just in case. Of course, now you're a tap away from a VFR chart. So there's 3 major ways to decide that an instrument is failing. You get an off flag. You have the needle or whatever it is acting weird. And the hardest one to figure out, but the most likely way you're going to figure it out, is that you're looking at the other instruments and it doesn't agree. You've got your attitude indicator, shows a 5-degree pitch, but your altimeter isn't moving and your VSI isn't moving. It makes you wonder, so is the altimeter not work? And VSI, is it a static problem or is it a gyro problem? If on the test you'd rather say act screwy instead of erratic behavior, that's okay. You can say the gauges act screwy. That's an acceptable answer in lieu of erratic. Huh? I probably would give you half credit to full credit, somewhere in there, depending on how much meditation I've been doing prior to that. Question? That's up to you. You get to decide. If you think it needs to do that, go for it. Yeah, that's going to tell them, oh, they're freaking out up there. I'll take even better care of them. So I think you brought up a really good question. Where people get wrapped up, especially after they got pilot certificates and they don't want to deal with the FAA. Oh, man, if I declare an emergency, I'm going to have to fill out a report. Well, do you want to die or do you want to fill out a report? So you tell me which one of those is. And I'm not trying to get on anybody's case if they don't declare an emergency, but I think people get too worried about whether they're going to. As soon as you say the word emergency, you get preferential treatment, automatic I won't say by law, but by training, those air traffic controllers, when you say I'm declaring an emergency, a little snap goes in their head, and they start getting everybody out of your way, and you won't even notice it. You're gonna do that straight in. They're not gonna put you in holding patterns. They're just gonna they'll give you vectors really nice to the final approach fix. They'll get you down to the right altitude. Maybe they'll give you 1,000 feet at a time. I don't know. Yeah. So declare an emergency. The worst that's going to happen is you're going to have to write a report within the next 10 days or something like that. So what? You're probably going to write a report anyway. And they don't grade you on your grammar. So, of course, we all know this first statement here, that the attitude indicator failure is the worst one to deal with. And we've already talked about this stuff right here. We've talked about you got to use the turn coordinator for bank. And remember, that turn coordinator, since it's got a canted gyro in it, that wing will go left or right with your initial roll, even though the nose hasn't started moving left or right yet. So it's really, really helpful if the attitude indicator goes out. That turn coordinator is going to be very helpful for telling you if you're rolling the airplane or not. And of course, you get the airspeed, VSI, and altimeter to help you with pitch. Me personally, I like the VSI and the altimeter for pitch better than I like the airspeed, because it's easier for me to see a change, me personally. And of course, we already remember from a day or two ago, the vertical speed indicator, it doesn't give you an accurate feet per second for 6 to 9 seconds, but the needle moving away from zero, either moving up or moving down, that does give you a good indication right away. So it can be used as the sensitive part of whether you're changing pitch. And if you practice that at a while, you could actually use how fast the altimeter is moving to tell you what you're doing with pitch. Of course, if you're trying, most of the time when you're instrument flying, you're not changing pitch. You're at a constant altitude, so most of the time you're looking at the altimeter and it's hopefully staying in one place. Wow, this looks familiar. In fact, if your DG quits, you can use ands and unos to use the compass. Or you can do time turns. Oh wait, they're more accurate and they're easy. They're easier. Of course, that's all a review there, right? You take your latitude, so we're about 37 degrees north of the equator. Every degree of latitude is 60 miles, 60 nautical miles, so 60 nautical miles times 37. That's a little under 2,400 nautical miles from the equator. ANDS accelerate, undershoot north, overshoot south. That's what's talking about your latitude. If I'm turning to the south, I need to overshoot it by 37 degrees. But that's if I'm pointed due south. I'll tell you what, I'll wait till you're done writing and then I'll talk. It'll be easier to pay attention. So how many of you think you're going to be doing compass turns while you're accelerating or decelerating? Yeah, me as well. I don't think you're going to be accelerating or decelerating much if you have a DG out. So we're not going to worry so much about the acceleration and decelerations going east and west. But half of our turns are going to end up being, at least in some partial amount, north or south. So we actually did one today in sim. We're going to roll out on north, undershoot north, so 37 degrees before we got to north. That's where we rolled out, and now the compass kept swinging. We had differing successes on that. Oh, okay, you did a little bit less than 37? Okay, and you were pretty good? Okay, all right. Of course, if you're going to roll out on an east or west heading, you just roll out on east or west. The problem is when it's halfway between north and east or halfway between south and west, you can use about half of that latitude. If we use 37, we can knock that down to 15 or 20. Anybody have any questions there? And still, what's the best answer? Time turns. So you're going to end up practicing both of these more than just what we've done so far. Of course, if the turn coordinator quits, of all those gauges, I don't know. I think I'd rather lose the VSI than the turn coordinator. If I had my choice, I'd rather have the airspeed, the attitude indicator, and the altimeter. But nobody's going to ask you which one you want to lose. Have you ever seen that comic where it's about Santa's getting a check ride? And when you fly multi-engine airplanes, the big deal about multi-engines is if one engine quits, can you maintain the yaw of the airplane correctly? And you're going to have to nose the airplane down. So it's called losing an engine. And so an examiner is sitting in the sleigh with Santa on his flight review, and the examiner has a shotgun, and he says, "Yep, you're going to lose one on takeoff." Okay, fine. I don't know. I've never eaten my own pet. So this here is mostly a review from yesterday or the day before. If we got a blocked static system, airspeed indicator is going to be inaccurate. We already talked about that. Vertical speed in the altimeter, or the vertical speed is going to go to 0. Altimeter is going to stop moving. What can you do about it? Number one, use your alternate static source valve if you have one. Number two, I forgot to put in there, VSI. It's because you're not going to, you know what, you need to write VSI in there because you got to pass your oral exam. So put in VSI for number two. Put in VSI for number two. Of course, we already covered the fact that GPS altitude is not a pressure altitude. And although your GPS ground speed is not the same as airspeed, it's certainly better than nothing. If I find out I've got a 10-knot headwind component for landing, and I normally fly 70-knot approaches, and I see a 60-knot ground speed on final, I'm probably going to be pretty happy.
Where did you want us to put in the VSI?
Right underneath alternate static source. On your check ride, I want you to have the right answer on your check ride. If you have a blocked static system, number one, the first and easiest and fastest thing to do is to open the alternate static source valve. The next thing, if you read up in FAA publications, they're going to say break the VSI case, and that'll vent your static system into the cabin, and you'll read 50 feet lower in altitude than you did before, 50 feet approximately. But in reality, me personally, I'm not going to break that thing. If I got a IFR GPS, heck, there's apps on your phone. I don't know, do phones have barometers in them? I know they got GPSs. I don't think the phones have barometers in them. So they couldn't really give you a pressure altitude. Okay. Question?
Yeah, so the altitude that is given to the ATC by transponder is pressure?
Yes. You're asking a good question. What is air traffic control receiving? And I didn't go into every detail yesterday. Your encoding altimeter, which could have the encoder in it, and so static goes to your altimeter, and now it has a wire going to your transponder. That's one way to do it. Or the diagram I gave you is there's the separate encoding altimeter box, the separate encoder box. Both of these are hooked up to your static system. What it sends is the pressure altitude uncorrected, and it sends it in 3 digits. Like 001 is 100 feet. 010 is 1,000 feet. 100 is 10,000 feet. So it can only send data rounded to the nearest 100 feet. But of course, it can go to 99,900. So it'll work up, into 30 some odd thousand feet. So it's giving data based on your nearest 100 feet. But it's only giving the data of the pressure that's inside your static system. And here's what I didn't say yesterday. You could write that down. You can spin the Colesman window on your altimeter all day long, and it doesn't change what goes to air traffic control. That's why if you level off at 3,000 feet and they call you up and say altitude, and you say 3,000 feet, they might come back and say, we show you at 3,300. Then the next thing is going to be, what altimeter do you have set in? And if you make sure you've got the correct altimeter set in, and it's still 300 feet off, then either the altimeter's wrong or your encoder is wrong. One or the other. So you need to write that up. But usually it's because the pilot doesn't have the right altimeter. You misset the altimeter is usually the case. So that's why they ask. They'll say, hey, 3435 Juliet, altimeter is 3015. What altitude are you reading? Because I show you at 3,500. And you're going to go, oh yeah, shoot, I set it wrong. That's usually the case. Does that answer your question?
Another question. So,
Yeah.
So with the ADSB, it's using GPS, right?
The ADSB, it's on a slide in the next lecture, but I'm glad you asked. ADSB is sending out your GPS altitude, but you still have to have mode C.
So they're still going to be basing it on pressure altitude.
They're still going to be assigning altitudes based on you flying pressure altitude. Now, how it works on the air traffic control end, can they program it and say, show me GPS altitude, or say, give me the altitude off the mode C? I don't know how that works. But yeah, we'll get to it. But ADSB transmits your ground speed, your position, your GPS altitude, and your identification. They program the ADSB to your airframe serial number with your N number. So when ADSB is working, they have your N number when you have your ADSB turned on. And it's like mode C. If you have an airplane with mode C, you have to turn it on. If you don't have mode C, you can't go to those places where mode C is. Like my airplane, the mode C 24-month automatic altitude transmitter inspection, it was done in August of 17. So when does it expire? What day in August of 19? The very last. I can fly it until midnight local time. And then I need to be out of the sky. I can't turn it off. If I'm flying along at night, I go, ooh, it's coming up on midnight, I got to turn it off. No, if you got it, you got to use it. So what that means is if I want to go flying on September 1st, I either have to get a ferry permit to go somewhere with an unairworthy airplane, or I could, because I got an airframe rating on my mechanic certificate, I could pull it out, do a weight and balance change on the aircraft. It's placarded inoperative, although it's not even there anymore. And now I can go fly anywhere. You don't need mode C. What's going to happen on January 2nd? I got to have ADSB out in addition to mode C anywhere I used to need mode C. So you're flying underneath Class C airspace into Chandler. Do you need mode C? I could fly into Chandler with no transponder at all. That's going to freak out departure control. Fresno approach, Cessna 79122 just departed Reedley. Landing Chandler, request VFR flight following. And they're going to go 790.122 squawk 3435 and ident. 790.122 unable. I don't have a transponder. And then I'm going to hear a pause. And they're going to say, for radar identification, turn left, heading 180. And they'll literally now they'll watch the beep, the little radar return and see if it goes south. And I'll fly for a minute or two, and then they'll say 790.122 turn right, heading 270. 790.122 turning right, 170, 270. 790.122 radar identification, or they might just say screw it, just keep going. We know where you are. I don't know. I don't know enough about air traffic control, but I could now legally fly and get VFR traffic advisors and fly underneath. You can get flight following.
Yeah, no, but if you don't have, if they say I don't have a transponder, if you say I don't have a transponder,
yeah,
they say no, you can't flight following.
They could say that. They could say unable. I don't have the time to mess with you. See how I didn't say the F word? They wouldn't say mess with you. They'd just say unable. They can and will deny you services that they are not mandatory to give you if they're too busy. And it's really up to them to tell you if they're too busy.
I'm eating my sandwich, I'm too busy.
They might want to pay attention so I don't fly under the instrument approach for all the jets flying in there. They might want me talking to them. Oh, let's see. Okay, so we already did that part. All right. So if you got a blocked Pitot tube, this is kind of redundant from a day or two ago. If the Pitot port is blocked, the airspeed will stop moving unless you change altitudes, right? So it only stops moving if you stay at one altitude. It could go to 0. It really depends on if it gets blocked really slowly. If the Pitot port gets blocked really slowly, it's possible that the pressure will bleed out while it's getting clogged, and then only static pressure gets stopped in there. So it really depends on how well it gets clogged up. I want to talk about the most likely time you're going to have an airspeed indicator failure, and that's having something get stuck in the. There's two most likely things to cause an airspeed to cause a Pitot port to get clogged. Is number one, dust, dirt, debris, or insects getting stuck in it, and that's before takeoff. And then on takeoff roll, you don't get the correct airspeed indication. And then the other is icing conditions, which is the one we are going to think about a lot, because now we're going to fly through visible moisture and possibly where the temperature is below freezing. Yeah.
Is there any issues if there's water that gets into that system?
If it's water, it just blows the water up the tube. Now, the problem then is if the water's there and you fly higher and higher and it gets colder and colder and it freezes, now you're going to be unhappy, which is another good reason if you're in visible moisture, what do you do with the Pitot heat? Huh? Very good. It only took me about a second to catch that, so keep me on my toes. I appreciate it. Did I answer your question okay? Yes. The good news is if you turn that thing on, the water, it doesn't move very far. I don't honestly know. I've never tried to figure out how far would that little tiny piece of water go into the Pitot system. I don't know. But it can't be that bad. Otherwise, I'd know about it because it would have been an issue for 75 years.
Okay.
So it can't be an issue because otherwise it'd be in all the books.
Okay.
Turn on your Pitot heat, dude. I mean, sir, whatever you prefer. Sir, dude. Sir, dude. I'm not Mr. Lebowski. I'm the dude. Oh, wait, look at that. Turn on the Pitot heat. You could also use GPS ground speed, understanding that it's true. It's like true ground speed. It's not indicated ground speed. And, of course, it's impacted by wind. Did I lose anybody there? So I forgot about this one, man. I was reading, and there are some transponders that on the transponder will tell you the pressure altitude that it is sending to air traffic control. Does JB have any of those? Oh, there was one in the sim. Oh, yeah. It's a Garmin. So there are, thank you for pointing that out. I didn't notice that. So next time we're in the sim, if you look at the transponder, it'll tell you what the pressure altitude it's sending. You got to remember that pressure altitude gets sent to air traffic control, and their computers add in the altimeter setting. And then what shows up on the controller's display is hopefully the same corrected for pressure altitude that yours is. And of course, we already talked about GPS altitude not being a pressure altitude. But hey, I like that because it's going to make it really hard for me to hit the ground, yes? That's one of our top 2 things we don't want to do when we're flying IFRs. Number 1, hit the ground with no notice. And number 2, hit another flying machine. Well, and I'm considering obstacles as part of the ground. I really don't like hitting obstacles. I'm counting obstacles as part of the ground. So with any luck, the next time we're in the sim, we're going to start practicing an unusual attitude recovery every time we go out there. You notice we're doing less and less attitude flying and more instrument stuff. So that's going to continue. At some point here after you've got 10 or another 2 or 3 weeks, we won't be doing any attitude flying anymore. But if the nose is high, you're going to be doing unusual attitude recoveries a lot. And we'll be practicing them in the simulator, so when you get to the AATD or the airplane, you've already got some practice. If the nose is high, you're going to add power. You're going to get into that habit pattern of adding power and pushing the nose down simultaneously and leveling the wings. Now, you're kind of doing this stuff at the same time. The nice thing is when you got a nose-high attitude, you're not going to overstress the airplane by pushing the nose forward. In fact, you're going to go from 1G to maybe a little bit less than 1G. Of course, you're not going to go to 0. You're not going to freak out. You're just going to push the nose over, you add power, lower the nose, and get the wings level. And you're going to essentially, you can write down there, I'll do all 3 of those simultaneously. But if the nose is low, you don't do them simultaneously. You'll notice that you level the wings before you raise the nose. So if you're in a nose-low attitude, because you want to stop, you don't want to stress the airplane, you're going to pull the power back and level the wings before you pull the nose up. Does anybody know why you want to level the wings before you pull the nose up?
Increasing load factor.
You'll have a big fat load factor. What if you're in a 60-degree bank turn and now you start pulling the nose up?
Get to accelerated stall.
Yeah, you can also have an accelerated stall. So it's a big deal when the nose is low that you get the wings level, the power back, and bring the wings level. So you're pulling the power back, getting the wings level. You can do that simultaneously. Then you pull the nose up. Any questions there? Wow. I'm only a day and a half behind right now. Woohoo! All right, so instrument navigation. I'm going to go through a lot of this stuff pretty fast because it's a review. There's only going to be 1 or 2 items here in this VOR stuff that hasn't already been covered. So we're going to talk about very high frequency omnidirectional range. Everybody knows what the abbreviation for VOR stands for. The frequency starts at 108. That's where FM stops. I'm not going to ask you that on the test. But the highest FM radio frequency is 107.9 megahertz. And then VOR frequencies and localizer frequencies, they haven't got to it, but there are airports like at the Fresno Yosemite that have effectively what's kind of like a VOR transmitter, except it's more sensitive and it only has 1 radio that it transmits for. So when you're flying that localizer, you can actually spin the OBS knob and it doesn't change anything. It's like if you're landing on runway 29 right and that radio is coming out on an inbound magnetic course of 287, we're going to spin the OBS knob to 287 just to remind us which direction we're going, but we could spin that thing all day long and it's just going to give you neither left or right of a magnetic course inbound on 287. But it's still using your VOR receiver. It's just a lot more sensitive. It's set up to be a lot more sensitive. That needle will move faster or move more for the same distance off. And you're going to get to the runway before you overfly the transmitter. So you're going to get to the runway and land before you overfly the transmitter. But those frequencies are also in here. And what starts at 118.0? What? Yeah, comm radios. Yeah, your communication frequencies start at 118.0. So there's two main components, ground stations and airborne equipment. Okay, great. We know about that. Ground stations, here's a picture of one. Who's not seen a VOR on a cross country? You look down, there it is. Okay. There's another one. The one north of the Prescott Airport. It's only about 10 miles away, so you see it a lot when you're flying out of that airport. One of the guys started calling it a cow church because he overflew it, and all the cows in that field that had a fence around it, they're all facing the VOR. All right, fine. Of course, we already know that they're aligned with the magnetic north when they're built, and there's 360-degree radials. Okay, great. Here's a nice one. And of course, you'll notice this one. What is the magnetic variation in this location? It's approximately what? If we scooted that VOR to the left, that is to the west, about a mile or about 2 miles. How much? I would have said 5, 10, 50. I'd say somewhere between 15 and 20 degrees magnetic variation. Okay. So, of course, this is just a reminder, VORs are bolted down to magnetic north, not true. So you can underline the word magnetic there. Of course, I don't want to go into the theory here too much, but it's a variable signal. Effectively, electronically, it rotates, and it's a phase differential, and I don't want to go into phase differentials today. Anybody want me to talk about phase differentials for 3 or 4 hours? Good. All right, service volumes. I can't remember. Y'all had somebody else for Private Pilot 2. Did y'all talk about service volumes? A little bit. Okay, well now we ought to talk about them a lot. So let's talk about a high altitude VOR. If you need to draw this drawing on your paper, I think that'd be a lovely, lovely idea. So if you have a high altitude VOR, and way more than half of the VORs out there are high altitude. That's most of them are high altitude. So you'll notice that from 1,000 feet AGL to 1450, it's good for 40 nautical miles. So that means so let's take that as an example here. Let's talk about Clovis VOR. How far is Visalia Airport within 40 nautical miles direct line to Clovis VOR? It's probably pretty close. But hey, by the time we get to Visalia, we're going to crank in Visalia VOR. But if we get above 14,500 in our turbocharged PA-28 and we put on oxygen, between 14.5 to 18, it's 100 nautical miles. And that's the radius, okay? That's the radius, that's not the diameter. That is the distance from the transmitter. So if I want to use this VOR and have it good out to 130 nautical mile radius from the station, what class airspace am I going to be in if I'm getting 130 miles VOR, legal VOR service volume? Well, it's alpha, yeah. I'm going to be, if I'm somewhere between 18,000 and 45,000, I'm in class A airspace. Now, there's a couple of biz jets that'll go to around 15,000. Now, here's what's great. I want you to write this down because I don't think it's on the slide. If you're flying an official IFR airway, a Victor airway, or a jet airway, the FAA has already checked this for you, and you don't have to check it. So why don't you pull out your iPad and open up your low altitude and route chart. Let's look at it over the central San Joaquin Valley.
Can you repeat that again?
Yeah.
You're flying
If you are on an FAA Victor Airway, spelled V-I-C-T-O-R, Victor Airway, or a jet airway, then you do not have to check the service volumes to see if they're the FAA, yeah, the service volume is what we're talking about. What's the volume of space you can be in and have it, and know that the VOR is going to work well. Because according to this, if I'm below 1,000 feet, I can't use this VOR for sure. So that's great news, because more than likely, if I'm flying navigating via VOR, then I'm probably going to be flying on a Victor Airways. Jet Airways are up there in higher altitudes. Pretty sure it's Class A. We, little airplanes, are only going to be flying the Victor Airways. In fact, the identifier for the airway is going to start with the letter V, with the letter Victor. And I think if there's a dash, isn't there a dash in there, David? Is it like Victor-235 or something like that? Nope, just Victor 230. Okay, great. So if you look at Fresno Yosemite Airport, slightly to the left of it, you're going to see a black line coming in on your low altitude and route chart. Victor 230. If I'm flying one of these Victor Airways, I don't have to worry about the service volumes. So really, the only time you have to be checking the service volumes is if you were flying a route and A, you're navigating with a VOR, and B, you're doing it off of the airway. Let me say that again to remind you to write it down. The only time you as an IFR pilot are responsible to check the service volumes is when you are navigating with VORs and you're not on an airway. You're off of an airway. And those two, if you have both of those applying, you have to check the service volume of the VORs you're using to navigate. Yeah. If you're flying, if you're navigating with a VOR and you're off an airway, then you have to make sure that you're inside of the service volume of whatever VOR you're navigating. You have to check the service volume. This is very, very, very infrequent. And you'll notice I said navigating with VOR. What if you got a Garmin 430 and you push the CDI button and it says GPS? Are you navigating with the VOR anymore? Yeah, you don't really give a rat's behind about the service volume. But service volumes tend to be on written tests, and they can ask you on your oral exam. So there was the high, and here's the low. So you can, whoops, so you can draw a picture. And the terminal. There's, I'm trying to think, I don't know where the nearest terminal VOR is. There's not one in Fresno, Visalia, or Madera, or McLaren.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So how come some VORs says the radios from this degree to this degree can't go farther than 10 nautical
You can't go farther because there's terrain in the way.
Oh, okay.
So Jonathan's question, let's just say that VOR is on top of this table, and I'm flying out over here, but if there's a mountain on this table that gets in the way of the VOR radio signals, I'm not going to be able to receive it. So it's going to say, if you're further than this distance out, you need to be higher. Because remember, VOR radios are line of sight, just like COM radio signals. So that would also be a good thing for you to write down on your notes somewhere. VOR radio waves don't bend around the Earth's surface like AM radio does, or AGM. So obstacles get in the way. Just like if you're on the backside of Camel Mountain, can you talk to departure control? Probably never try. That'd be kind of fun to deliberately descend down 1,000 feet AGL, get on the backside of Camel Mountain with it directly between you and Fresno. I'm going to guess, I don't know where their FM, their radio transmitters are, and give it a try. Maybe they got a transmitter somewhere else. Anybody have any questions on this slide? And nobody's ever going to use that stinking chart. I wouldn't worry about writing it down, but technically, if the VOR is down here at the bottom, you can figure out how high you'd have to be. If you're worried about this, you're probably going to crash into the side of a mountain or hit an obstacle anyway. That's my personal opinion. All right. Of course, VOR airborne equipment. Of course, they blew it here. The pictures, that was me. I should have pushed the CDI button, so I got VLOG. And of course, here's some, I can't remember what radio this is. So airborne equipment is a receiver, and of course, CDI stands for Course Deviation Indicator. We know lots and lots and lots about course deviation indicators. You notice the dots or the lines, each one is 2 degrees. Each one of those is 2 degrees. Yeah, when the needle deflects to the left or deflects to the right, like for instance. Okay. We got the OBS knob, the Omni bearing selector. Probably nobody will ask you what OBS is. And look, there's an off flag. It ain't working. And of course, the to from indicator, which we're very familiar with now. See if I think I've got pictures. Yeah, there's one kind of VOR antenna. There's 2 or 3. On mine, it looks like a towel bar. Mine was installed in 1969. People ask me what that is, and I tell them when I wash the airplane, that's where I hang my towels. They look at me funny like they believe me. Yeah. That kind of sticks out on the side. No handhold. That's on the side of the helicopter. All right, how do we use this thing? Okay, it shows our degrees, 2 degrees per dot or 2 degrees per line, whichever way you want to call it. Already covered that. Omni bearing selector, which radial or magnetic course you want to track. So this is probably the #1 issue, and sometimes I say it wrong in the simulator. This is the #1 issue I see people with using VORs, is confusing the radial you're on versus the magnetic course you want to fly. So you really have to understand where you are. Am I going to be flying to the VOR or away from it? And if you're going to be flying to it, then you need this. At all times, you're going to spin the magnetic course into the top of the CDI. The question is, now, if I'm going to it, I need to be looking for a to indication. If I'm going from it, I need to be looking for a from indication. I think we'll get more practice in the simulator. All right. Of course, to from, solving the ambiguity. Am I going to it or from it? And of course, if the nav flag comes out, you're toast. Hopefully the to and the from goes away. And of course, we already know this. After we go to the right frequency, we turn up the volume, we listen to the Morse code, and make sure it matches the VOR we're looking for. Common error. You're cranking in 115.6 and you really crank in 112.9 because your brain's not working right. And you just go, oh yeah, there's the Morse code, and you turn it down. And you're flying towards Bryant instead of Clovis. So you need to look at the dots and dashes on the chart you're looking at and make sure you correctly identify it. Some VORs, they'll transmit high watt data, and on the course, you know, some VORs you can talk to the flight service station, and they'll transmit on the VOR frequency. Probably a better way to write this, instead of saying that OBS must match your heading, your OBS needs to match the magnetic course / direction you're trying to fly, because it only works for your heading if there's no wind. So you got to cross out the word heading. The OBS, the top of the CDI needs to match. Maybe that's a better way to write it. The top of your CDI needs to match the magnetic course you want to travel. And then, of course, I put that question in there. The top of the VOR will take me to the VOR if the to from indicator says to. Don't take any notes here. Other than HSI, somebody might ask you what's an HSI. So write down a horizontal situation indicator. Horizontal situation indicator. And you don't have to write down what I'm about to say. I'm not going to ask you on the test. You're not going to fly an airplane with an HSI. I can't remember what's in the Nebraska 142 as an HSI. Okay, well then you will be flying an HSI. The HSI, they take a deep directional gyro and they put a magnetic sensor out in a wing or in the tail, and then they slave the gyro to that magnetic sensor so you don't have to set it. I mean, you still have to check it. every 5, 10, 15 minutes, but you don't have to set it. And then they put the VOR on there. You see that yellow line in there? You see how the yellow line is where that radio is. So that means if you're flying in that direction, you could turn left and start going towards that radio. So it's a lot easier to read than a separate DG and a separate VOR. It makes it a lot easier to read. All right, let's talk about limitations. We all know about the cone of confusion. You're flying over it, the needle starts to wiggle, the two fronts starts to flop around. Really all you know is, okay, I'm really close. What do you do when you hit the cone of confusion? You go, oh, I'm confused. Or do you pull out your phone and start watching Conehead skits from Saturday Night Live from the 1970s? That's what most of us do is watch Conehead. You don't do anything. You don't turn. You just keep going. When do you know that you've passed the VOR? What on that thing says, I passed the VOR? When the to from needle flips and stays. Yeah. As soon as you get a positive flip from on your to from needle. All right, so that's all right up there. Oh, the zone of ambiguity. Woo-hoo-hoo. If you're off the center of this here with the black line, the dotted line, and the X, the red X's, if you were anywhere to the left or the right of that where the dotted line is, it's trying to figure out whether you're going to or from. How often do you have that problem? If you're on that dotted line, let's just say to the right, the VOR is directly to your left. The VOR is going to have a hard time there deciding if you're to from. But how often are you doing that? If you're way off like that, you're probably turning toward the VOR and spinning your OBS knob and flying straight toward it. So if this is happening, you're probably making a mistake. Hey, I did put it in here. Yay! VOR radios are line of sight, and of course, terrain or obstacles can get in the way. And that's part of why the service volume gets bigger when you go up in altitude, is because you can get away from terrain obstacles, and you can mitigate some of that curvature of the road. You ever notice that when you go to the beach, you can't see Hawaii with a really good pair of binoculars? Does anybody ever look for Hawaii at the beach? No? Okay. All right, DME is a 3-letter abbreviation for distance measuring equipment. Distance measuring equipment. DME is usually located at 2 kinds of places. One, they co-locate them at VORs. Like Clovis VOR has a DME. So I can fly the Clovis, I can fly the Fresno Chandler VOR DME approach as long as I've got VOR and I got DME. Because there's a DME transmitter out there. So I don't have to have a GPS. So I've got a VOR and I got a DME. Another place DME transmitters are located, there is one at the Fresno Yosemite Airport. So that if you're shooting an approach there and it requires a DME, they got a transmitter. I think they got one there. So somewhere, if this is the VOR antenna, that's probably the DME antenna over there on the left. This is a standalone DME transmitter. There's usually, they paint it white and red so you don't hit it. It's usually off the side of the runway. It's usually off the side of the runway somewhere. And the taller thing with the lights on top, that's the DME antenna. Oh, there it is, DME. Wow, it's like I knew this already. All right, so let's see if I can cover the way DMEs work. You're flying along in your airplane, you have a DME transmitter and receiver. If you look, you don't need to pull it out, but if you look at that approach plate, it said DME channel 76. So if you had a DME receiver, you crank in 76. That's not really the frequency, that's just what they call it. You know, it's like it's in the 1,000 That DME, every so often, it sends out, it's multiple times per second, it sends out a short burst of a signal that lasts like, a millionth of a second. And any DME receiver on the ground that gets it, it's tuned to channel 76, so there's probably only one, it's going to wait a certain amount of time, and it's going to send a signal back. The DME receiver in the airplane, that amount of time it waits, that's standard across all DME transmitters. It's going to take that time it takes to get there and the time it takes to get back, which is a really small amount of time. Remember, it's traveling at the speed of light, right? It's going to measure that and figure out how many miles away it is. I'm not making this up. There's somebody with a plastic pocket pen protector and a slide rule in the 1940s who was really smart. Figured out how to make electronics that could measure really, really short periods of time. When it gets that signal, it's going to send out that signal it sends out. It's responding to the signal you sent. That signal from your airplane has a certain piece of data on it. So when it sends the code back out, it sends that data on the front of the signal. So your DME is the only one that's paying attention to it. Because otherwise, if 5 other airplanes are around, that thing's sending out DME all the way around. You would never know if it's 5 miles or 10 miles or 12 miles or whatever. So that it's really what it's doing is it's interrogating going back and forth. So the signal is specific to your airplane. When you look, now, if I got it, here's our limitations here. Don't worry about the accuracy of DME. If we're using DME, we're going to fly it. We're not going to be using DME. Are we going to be flying a little airplane worrying about DME more than 199 miles away? Probably not. You can get, so in LA, this might be an issue. In LA, if 100 airplanes tune in one DME channel, and they're all capable of receiving it, they're high enough to get to it, that 100th one, it won't work. But that's very seldom the case because they got a lot of different DMEs. You're really just going to set it to the VOR or the airport you're going to. And then, of course, slant range. When I say slant range, and it tells you, here's our DME transmitter, and here's our airplane. If the distance to you and the airplane, or from the transmitter, is 10 nautical miles, this distance right here might be 9.9 nautical miles. This is called slant range, and that's what you read. And that's, you don't worry about it. If that's what it says on the approach, it's taking that into account, and you fly it. If there's a little bit of difference, now what if you have GPS? Guess what? Your GPS distance is going to be this down here. But the difference is so little, we don't care. The difference is so little, we don't care. And of course, with DME, it's line of sight because it's a really, really, really high frequency, and hopefully that's, oh, there it is. Okay, we're almost done here. We already talked about that, and who cares about that slide? So we'll start up on this slide on Monday. And what day is the test? Tuesday is the test. What's going to be on the test?